Shri Govind Gaudeji, Honorable Minister for Art and Culture, Government of Goa. A very dynamic minister and one who's doing a lot for the entire art and culture landscape of our state. Professor Ghulam Mohammed Sheikh, a living legend of art education in our country, Padma Bhushan. Professor Raman Shiv Kumar, who of course we will adopt entirely as a Goa University person, so I will not refer to his other institutional affiliation. Mario Miranda, Chair Professor at Goa University. Ms. Vidya Shivdas, Shri Bose Krishnamachari. Really all of the extremely distinguished artists, art historians, art professors who are assembled here in this audience. Ladies and gentlemen, namaskar and a very good morning to all of you. For those of you who are from out of Goa, which is the majority of people so far as I can make out, welcome to Goa, this lovely land of red soils, verdant greens and blues of every single imaginable hue that you can think about in its rivers and lakes and skies and ocean. It's really great that this conference has finally come together. We've been discussing it for quite a while, sort of conversations on this between me and the Foundation for Indian Art and Education, and indeed with the Mario Miranda Chair. We've been at least now 12, 14 months, we've been talking about this possibility of it coming together. So I'm delighted. It would not have been possible, I can tell you, from the Goa University end, were it not for the total backing and support of the Directorate of Art and Culture of Goa government. And therefore, on behalf of the university, I want to unreservedly express our deep gratitude to the Honorable Minister, because there is no other state in the Indian Union where the government, this is not the Directorate of Higher Education, or this is coming from Art and Culture. They have created these 7 chairs in our university under our Visiting Research Professor program. So the Mario Miranda Chair obviously is the one that, all of this activity is happening under, but we have 6 other chairs which cover pretty much every aspect of the human and social sciences. And we are actually actively in conversation right now with other entities in Goa government to see whether we can get similar support in science and technology as well, so we can create a bunch of similar chairs in areas of science and technology. It's really a truly wonderful program, and from the beginning we have tried as part of the Visiting Research Professor program to do several things. One is get some of the most important names, both inside and outside Goa, to come and spend significant amounts of time at the university. But this was a brainwave of my predecessor, Dr. Satish Shetty. I merely inherited the program and have cannot take any credit in setting it up. But the idea was that if you really wanted persons of eminence to come and contribute to the students of the university, but to the wider discerning public of the state, you couldn't expect somebody to come and spend 3 full years or 2 full years here, which is what typically happens in these chairs. So the real innovation organizationally was to say that on any one chair at any given time, we'll have not one person but several. So instead of one person coming to Goa University for 3 years, we'll have on each chair maybe 3 people coming for 3 years and coming several times. So they would come for 15 days, 18 days. What would they do while they are here? They would teach a 1-credit course, for example, on an area which otherwise we would not be covering. Or they would hold research practicums, research methodology workshops, or they would give a series of public lectures. In the case of our chairs in the performing arts, we have one in Indian music and one in Western music. It involves lecture demonstrations, public performances. So in every single way, and we are always telling our visiting research professors that think of ways in which you can contribute, and there's no idea if so fancy that we will reject it out of hand. So, we have a committee which is, being created by the Executive Council of Goa University, which monitors this program very carefully. We are very careful about the amount of money we spend on the various activities, and every single proposed activity is taken. So, to give you one example, as part of our Anthony Gonzalez Chair in Western Music, we have managed to establish the only choir in any university in the country. And I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to hear the Goa University Choir, but I assure you, I'm not saying this because I'm the Vice Chancellor. It is a choir that has now, and it's really been around for about 4 years, it's already garnered a global reputation. And you have choirs from around the world, you have conductors and composers from around the world who come, spend time in Goa, and actually contribute in tangible ways to this choir. And none of this would have been possible in a typical public university in our country. We are just so engrossed in the teaching, learning, evaluation, and research process that who has the ability and the time to do this. So I can tell you this very clearly. We are doing this because we've had the unstinted support of the government. In fact, we are really lucky in Goa. We are one of those rare state universities which does not lack funds at all. I mean, as I go around Vice Chancellor conferences around the country, and there was a Vice Chancellor from Madhya Pradesh who was telling me that she has a annual salary budget of 40 crores. And she gets an annual grant from her state government of 4 crores per annum. So you can imagine, how can you run a university if you're getting 10% of what you need just to maintain the salaries of your teaching employees? So, I mean, and maybe that's an extreme case of dysfunction, but this is not something this is what she said in a public meeting of Vice Chancellors, where the Honorable, HRD Minister, Government of India, was present on the podium. So I'm not saying something which is, whispered to me over a cup of tea. It was publicly said by this, I would say, very brave Vice Chancellor. And the fact that she was a woman, in fact, is not an accident. I suspect a man would have been more prudent in saying this publicly. So, I mean, the point is we are very fortunate here to have the unstinting support of the state government. And I think that's one of the reasons, there are many others, about why Goa is widely recognized as the most progressive state. And hard socioeconomic indicators seem to suggest that as well. I'm really, really sort of glad that this conference is bringing together art practitioners and art teachers and is mulling over first of all, I think what's really remarkable for me as a social scientist is in a country where opinion is plentiful and free and hard data is very much given the go-by, and we see it in our news media all the time. I think it's really remarkable that this is a process that is data-led, that, before you're actually going to deliberate on, what are the future pathways, the possibilities in your subtitle, you're actually doing a data-based analysis of what the current situation is. And that's really important in all aspects of public policy. We really need to get a sense, where we are before we can begin to, start envisioning what our future possibilities are. Because it's very important when we do a vision thing, have a vision exercise. It's very important that we have our heads in the clouds, but it's also really important that we have the feet firmly planted on the ground. And the way you plant the feet firmly on the ground is by not losing sight of the real situation, the lived situation. And that's where the data-driven process comes in. So I'm really, really glad that you're all coming together and reflecting on what the challenges are and what the future possibilities are. I really like the word challenges also in your subtitle, but I hope you will treat it in, what is a challenge? A challenge, I believe, is any task which is obviously impossible, yet non-obviously possible. And I think that really, in some ways, is what should drive any kind of futuristic understanding of what to do with art and art education. One of the problems in our system, of course, the education system of our country as a whole, is the high dropout rate. And I suspect in the creative field, even more so. It's in any branch of learning, there is in India a high dropout rate. And retention is always a problem and has been a problem historically in our system. But I suspect in an area where creativity fundamentally is inherent to the whole process of production, I suspect the dropout rates are higher. And I actually recall this very fine book I'd read some years ago by David Gallinson, Old Masters in Young Geniuses, and the distinction that Gallinson draws between conceptual innovators and experimental innovators. The conceptual innovators who achieve a certain degree of maturity and refinement very early on in their careers. In other words, they are in a way almost born perfect. They innovate conceptually, and he gives Pablo Picasso as the quintessential example of this type of genius, a conceptual genius. But then he says something which has really sort of haunted me and stuck with me, and as I've gone around being a vice chancellor, first in Jammu and Kashmir and now here in Goa, it's constantly something that I'm thinking about in terms of our policies and etc. And he says that the second type of innovator, the experimental innovator, is one who struggles and struggles and struggles before perfection is achieved, or something close to perfection is achieved. These are the late bloomers in the system. They achieve greatness experimentally by doing things over and over again. And he gives really the haunting example of Cézanne as an example of an experimental innovator, an experimental genius. And I think one of our real challenges, and I don't think this is just pertains to art education, but I think for all branches of education in our country, is what do we do with the late bloomers? Because we have an education system that's fundamentally unforgiving. And we live in a fundamentally unequal country where there are many, many geniuses, really bright individuals who come from social origins that are marginal, that are deprived. And for those coming from the marginalized and deprived sections of our society, to expect that they will all be conceptual geniuses is fundamentally unfair. And so we need to have a system, when we think about inclusiveness in education, we need to have a system that creates the scope for these late bloomers. Because if you're a late bloomer with very wealthy parents, it's not a problem. You can keep doing it till you get better and better. But what about those late bloomers who have to sort of, either make a breakthrough early on in their careers or move elsewhere to something else? So I think in our context, and anybody concerned with education in our country, but particularly with art education, I think needs to grapple with the question about what our system is doing for the late bloomers. And I suspect, again, as a political scientist, I'm data-driven. So, I don't know. I haven't studied this myself. But I suspect that we aren't doing a whole lot. And therefore, we need to begin to think about that very seriously. One final thought, and I'll stop. But I do want to bring this out again, when we think about art education, let's also spend a bit of time thinking about art in education. In other words, it's not just that branch of learning that trains and teaches people to become, visual artists, to become practitioners in the visual arts. That's really important, and that's the heart of what you'll all be discussing today and tomorrow. But somewhere out there, I would urge you, please think about art in education. How can you bring art into the education process at all levels of education and in all branches of learning? So that art is not something that remains confined to our colleges of art. I think that's one of the fundamental problems in our country, is that we put everything into silos. Whereas what you need are comprehensive institutions of learning. What we've done is we've just put everything, we put them into silos. And the net result is that cross-fertilization that is so necessary for the creation of new ideas, for innovation, just simply doesn't take place in our country, in our institutions of learning, because we've organized things so terribly. And I think we've got to get art into the education process as a whole. Because if we want our younger generation to be innovative and creative, and we really need our younger generation to be innovative and creative, we need them to question the status quo. We need them to ask whether there are better ways of doing things. It's got to come from somewhere, and that, I think, so if you can make art something that is part of the lived experience of all learners, not just those learners who are in as it were fine art, as we call it in our country. I think that we are fundamentally failing in a very, very significant way. Now, I don't know how much this is a part of your current agenda, and who am I to impose an agenda upon you? But all I, therefore, in a suggestive sense, urge you to somewhere in your deliberations think about this aspect as well. I've gone on rather longer than I'd intended to, but that's what happens when you aren't a specialist in the field. You tend to meander, which is what I've done, and vice chancellors are champion meanderers. I'll stop at this point. Again, warm welcome to all of you. I hope you have a really productive time here, and I hope you really enjoy Goa. Thank you very much. Jai Goa, Jai Hind.